A small, cozy house stands under the blue sky, illuminated by the bright sun, surrounded by trees. A girl is sitting at the table in the house and thinking about the fact that the exam for early promotion is starting soon. She plans to allocate a little more time for studying, and she also wants to review the material again in a study group. Raising her hand with the feather, the red-haired girl thought for a moment, and all because she realized that it would take much longer than she thought. The girl also thought that her mother had been dating again for about 2 months. At this time, a woman in a beautiful dress was hurrying down the corridor towards the girl's room. And when Marianne thought that she hoped that this time the separation would be much calmer, her mother burst into the room. Putting her hand to her chest and smiling happily, the woman announced that she was getting married. Since Mariana had only recently thought about her mother soon separating, she was very surprised by this news. Looking at the woman, she asked in surprise if this man was also divorced. A little later, sitting at the table, the mother told her daughter that this man was attentive to everything she did, and that's why she fell in love with him. And then the woman added that they were going to get married so early because he really wanted to tie the knot as soon as possible. Mom, with a joyful smile, admitted that she had finally given in because he even took responsibility for all the wedding preparations. Mariana, reacting to this news very calmly, replied that she thought this man was a very good person. And to herself, the girl thought that this relationship would last for some time, but she didn't think that it would lead to marriage. Mariana remembered that her mother, just 6 months ago, signed a statement about a second divorce and swore that she would never marry again. Putting the mug of tea on the table, she decided that this all looked so much like her mother. The girl looked at the happy woman who was smiling without hiding her joy. Smiling, she thought that as long as her mother was happy, she was happy too. But suddenly, the woman, looking at her daughter, said that there was a small problem. She explained that her man wanted to come this afternoon, and therefore her daughter would have to change her plans. The girl, hearing this, thought that with her mother, everything always happens unexpectedly, and therefore, smiling, she agreed with this. The woman added that she needed to leave because she had some things to do and left the room, and Marianne realized that she would have to cancel today's class. The maid who was serving at the table looked at her mistress with sympathy. Mariana, smiling at the girl, asked for another cup of hot tea. While pouring hot tea into a mug, the maid noticed that her mistress had chosen a bad time because the girl had a very important exam coming up. To this, the girl replied that her mother did not do this intentionally, and she is not one of those people who live an ordinary life. With Marianne's words, the maid agreed and noticed that the mistress was none other than Madame Tatiana. Madame Tatiana, nicknamed Madame Titi, was once an opera singer from a provincial town with unrivaled talent and dazzling beauty. She attracted supportive patrons far beyond the capital. She was a star of high society. This was before she disappeared without a trace. Countless people tried to find her, but there was not a single lead until she made a dramatic return, causing a stir. But the beautiful woman returned not alone, but with a child in her arms. And all those who admired her endlessly gossiped about her and her child. But the woman did not waver, and even without a husband, she decided that she would give everything possible as a mother, and so she became the outrageous but famous Madame Tatiana. The maid began to collect the dirty dishes from the table, and at that moment, she said that this was the mistress's third marriage. And then she added that perhaps the lady shouldn't have rushed again, and the girl, finishing her tea, noticed that her mother really loved pretentiousness. After this, the maid added that Marianne should wash and change her clothes because despite the fact that the events were sudden, she could not come to terms with the fact that the girl was not ready. Wiping her mouth with a napkin, Marianne replied that if she stood in front of her mother, no one would even notice her, and therefore it didn't matter what she was wearing. But the maid, slightly angry, noted that the young lady could not speak like that, to which the girl apologized and promised to dress appropriately so that Dina would not worry. After this, Marianne, getting up from her chair, said that she would go and get ready. The maid, looking after the young mistress, only sighed, worried about her. Through the leaves of the trees, one could see the road along which a very luxurious carriage was driving. In the carriage there was a young fair-haired man with a bouquet of flowers. Holding the beautiful white flowers in his hands, He thought that they had almost arrived. And with a dreamy smile, the young man understood that he would soon meet her. At this time, Marianne, having put on a new outfit, stood in front of the mirror. She was very curious about what kind of man he would be this time, and she just hoped that he would be the one who would make her mother happy for a long time. The girl knew that her mother looked completely innocent on the outside, but that was not true at all. Marianne's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door and the voice of the maid, who asked if she could come in for a minute. Dana, entering the room, said that Madame Tatiana had left because she needed new jewelry, and therefore the girl needed to go to the meeting place. Marianne, glad that she would not have to travel in a flashy carriage, agreed. At this time, the maid added that there was someone else's carriage standing at the back gate of the house. Hearing these words, Marianne was surprised what kind of carriage could be standing at their back gate. At this point, the maid suggested that perhaps her mistress had sent it for her, but Marianne replied that this could not be, and decided that it was not right to park a carriage at someone's back gate without warning. For some reason, the girl decided that this was another of her mother's suitors, and since she was leaving soon, she had to quickly convince them and send them back. Coming out into the backyard, she saw a very luxurious carriage and a red carpet that went from the carriage to the doors of the house. The girl didn't understand that this was intended. Could today really be such a special day? Marianne did not understand at all why such a luxurious carriage was standing here. While she was thinking that if this was another admirer with taste like her mother's, it would be difficult to drive him away, a young man got out of the carriage. He was dressed in a formal uniform and held beautiful white flowers in his hands. Seeing him, Marianne thought that she had not seen someone so young for a long time. The white-haired young man with blue eyes stepped out of the carriage and looked around. Seeing the girl, he smiled at her and asked if she was a servant of this family. And when he asked her to come in and deliver a message from him, the girl was very surprised. A young man with flowers in his hands standing near the carriage among the trees looked at the red-haired girl. With a smile, he said that today was a very important day for him, and she could not even imagine how long he had been waiting for it. Closing his eyes, the white-haired youth said that he had to win someone's heart. At that moment, Marianne thought that this guy was not joking, and she should decisively drive him away. Therefore, the girl said that, unfortunately, today he would not be able to meet with the lady. Pressing her hand to her chest, Marianne added that today Madame Tatiana had an official meeting with her remarriage partner, a very pleasant gentleman. And the girl also said that although it might break his heart, this pain can be overcome. Marianne continued that she believed that the young man would be able to overcome the pain of loss and move on from it, which greatly surprised him. As she was about to leave, the girl wished him to remain a strong young man. Turning around, Marianne went to the door, but suddenly the young man shouted for her to wait a little. The young man added that he knew that the meeting was today, but the girl, hearing these words, thought that he was intrusive and that this was not her mother's type. And when he said that he had not come to see Madame at all, the girl stopped in confusion. The young man added that he had come to escort her daughter, Lady Marianne, and hearing this, the girl turned around. And at this time, a white-haired young man approached the girl and asked to call her. Mariana was shocked when she realized that he had come for her, not for her mother, and she didn't understand anything. For some time, the girl and the boy simply looked at each other in silence. But then, suddenly, the girl apologized for the misunderstanding and asked the young man to stop calling her a lady. She calmly explained to the young man, who stood and looked at her in surprise, that this title weighed on her. Looking into her eyes, he exclaimed, was he really standing in front of Madame Tatiana's daughter now? And when the girl confirmed that he understood everything correctly, his eyes opened wide in surprise. And the girl, pressing her hand to her chest, said that she was Marianne. The young man still could not tear his wide-open blue eyes away from the girl. And then he bowed and apologized because he didn't want to be rude to her at their first meeting. The girl replied that anyone could make a mistake. But the young man didn't understand what the girl was talking about, so she explained that she was already used to it and that she and her mother were completely different. Smiling, the young man said that he had not yet introduced himself and added that his name was Orion Miller, the young Duke of Miller Estate. And then, slightly embarrassed, he added that he would be her brother in a sense. Then, giving Marianne the flowers, he said that since today was a special occasion, he had come to accompany her and apologized for not warning her in advance. The young man explained that he, like the girl, found out about it suddenly. Mariana, looking at him, thought that he was a very polite guy. Looking at Orion, she thought that, being the son of a duke, he didn't have to be so formal. Marianne was grateful, but turning to the young man, she explained that she could not go with him, which greatly surprised him. Pointing her finger at the carriage, the girl added that her tastes differed from those of her mother. She added that she could not travel in such a flashy carriage, and when the girl said that this was too much for her, the young man was struck to the heart. He asked the girl how she was going to get to the meeting place, to which she replied that she had rented a carriage, which was parked in front of the main gate. Hearing this, Orion exclaimed that then he too would ride in her carriage, which greatly surprised the girl. And the young man enthusiastically said that he also wanted to ride in her carriage, because that way they could travel together, but Marianne objected that it would be quite uncomfortable for him there. Orion, with a joyful smile, replied that if he could go with her, then everything would be fine. When they sat down in the hired carriage, they realized that it was a little cramped. The girl, looking at Orion and the two knights who were crowded on the seat in front of her, asked if they were comfortable. Mariana added that she could see how uncomfortable they were and suggested that they go separately. And then, patting the seat next to her, she invited someone to sit next to her. Hearing this, Orion replied that everything was fine, because for the knights of the Miller estate, this discomfort was not a hindrance. One of the knights added that everything was fine, and then explained that knights were not allowed to take a place next to a lady. At that moment, Marianne thought that the young man was going too far, and that he really had such a compelling reason to accompany her. Watching Orion closely, the girl realized that he clearly wanted to tell her something. She thought that as the duke of one of the 5 great estates of the empire, he would likely not approve of a mother and daughter of common origin being drawn into this so unexpectedly. Placing her hands on her knees, the girl decided that she should speak first to take the burden off him. And so, she said that the young duke had nothing to worry about. Upon hearing this, Orion looked at the girl in bewilderment, not understanding what she meant. Marianne explained that he did not have to register her in the duke's family, and she was not asking for financial support, nor would her mother demand anything in exchange for marrying the duke. Lowering her head, the girl added that she planned to get an education at the academy and become independent, and asked him not to worry. Orion still looked at Marianne with bewilderment, not understanding what she was talking about, and said out loud that he hadn't even thought about it. Suddenly, the carriage hit a bump, and the knights, along with the young duke, became very uncomfortable. When the young man asked if the girl was okay, she asked him to stop the carriage. Having looked at the knights, the girl got out of the carriage, saying that they were almost there, and she would walk because it would be more convenient for them. The young duke asked the girl to wait, but she had already gotten out of the carriage. Marianne didn't even hear it, because she was busy thinking that she should have said that her mother thought the same way as she did, and that they didn't need help, or something like that. The girl understood that she would become independent after her education, and that her mother had enough financial support to live without problems, and what she really needed was love, which would make her happy. Approaching the meeting place, Mariana was very surprised and wondered if her mother's new man had really rented the entire cafe. And she also remembered the luxurious carriage in which the young duke had arrived, and she realized that this was what it meant to be a duke. Suddenly, she heard her mother's voice calling the girl by name. Looking around, she saw her mother sitting at the table with her new man, calling her to join them. The duke smiled affably and said that he was pleased to meet her. The man added that since this was their first meeting, he had prepared a modest place, and the girl thanked him for his attention. Marianne thought that renting such a magnificent place and calling it modest was somehow not the right thing, but at that moment she heard a question about whether she had arrived alone. The duke added thoughtfully that his son had said he would accompany her, but apparently they had missed each other. Mariana explained that they did not miss each other, but circumstances had developed in such a way that she had arrived separately. And then she added that Orion should arrive soon. The duke, who was listening attentively, asked again why she came separately. Marianne explained that the carriage was a two-seater and it was uncomfortable to travel with the knights, so she walked alone. The Duke was very surprised that they had taken a two-seater carriage, but when he wanted to clarify why this had happened, his son joined them. The young man apologized for being late and for behaving so impolitely at their first meeting. The Duke indignantly said that this brat was late for such important events, but Madame Tatiana tried to smooth things over, saying that nothing terrible had happened. When the young man sat down at the table, the girl apologized to him for causing him inconvenience, to which he responded negatively. And then Orion added that they came to her without notice, and it was he who should apologize to her. After these words, Marianne looked closely at the young man, who sat down at the table and sighed tiredly. She noticed that his hair looked disheveled and his clothes were wrinkled, and the girl also understood that the situation was annoying, but instead of getting angry, he apologized to her. Marianne thought that given the authority of the Duke's family, the young man was not obliged to be so attentive to her, and at that time, she noticed how picky the Duke was with his son. Only her mother was having fun. She was happy and laughing, trying to make the atmosphere at the table more friendly. Watching how Madame Tatiana communicates with the Duke and how happy they are, the girl thought that the Duke seems friendly towards her mother. Turning her attention to the plate, the girl began to cut the meat into small pieces. At that moment, Mariana closed her eyes and thought that it was not very pleasant to be at such events. The Duke, noticing the thoughtful expression on the girl's face, asked if she didn't like the food, to which she replied in the negative, saying that she just felt a little uneasy. Mom, smiling, added that she didn't need to worry because it wasn't even her marriage. At that moment, the girl thought that only her mother felt calm, sitting in front of the imperial Duke. Putting his fork on the table, the Duke said that she was very young and was already moving on to senior classes at the academy. He added that this is a truly promising talent for the future. The girl thanked the man for his kind words and explained that it was all thanks to her wonderful friends who guided her well. Orion, looking at Marianne with a smile, asked her not to be modest, because if it were not for her merits, she would not have been able to achieve such results. Everyone looked at the girl with kind smiles, which slightly embarrassed her. Unexpectedly, her mother asked if the girl was more nervous than usual because she was there, and then she suggested not talking about everything at once and just eating calmly. When everyone brought tea and dessert, the girl was so nervous she didn't even touch it. Looking at her mother and the Duke, she thought that he was indeed a good man, because she thought he would be stern, but he was so not attached to formalities and strict rules. Marianne was glad that he was so caring throughout the meal, but for her, he was just her mother's new husband, and such events were awkward for her, so when the Duke said that a simple introduction and a small lunch were enough for today, she was delighted. And then the man added that, since they were already relatives, he wanted to ask Orion to accompany her. Hearing this, the young man was very happy. But noticing that the girl did not really want this, the Duke decided to refrain from having his son accompany her, which upset the young man. Bowing her head, the girl thanked the man for his concern. Having already left the cafe, Mariana breathed a sigh of relief. After all, according to her feelings, this meeting lasted an eternity. But remembering my mother and the Duke, I realized that the woman looked very happy. And so, the girl smiled and decided that the main thing was that everything was okay with her mother. Suddenly, she heard Orion's voice asking her to wait. Turning around, she saw the young Duke running towards her. The girl said that if he wanted to accompany her, then he shouldn't. To this, Orion replied that he was not there for that, but there was something else that he had to tell her. Marianne looked at him with surprise, not understanding what else he needed. And so she apologized to him for getting out of the carriage and letting him down. But Orion said he wanted to talk about what they had talked about in the carriage, and while they ate, he thought about it. The girl suddenly asked about the notarial statement received in the magic tower, but Orion, for some reason, did not understand what she was talking about, and with his eyes wide open, he looked at her in surprise. Mariana explained that since it was difficult to believe what she had said earlier, they could get a notarized statement, and they could also take a blood oath as the easiest and fastest way. And then she asked Orion what they would probably prefer, a more proven method, but received a negative answer. When the girl asked if they wanted a more traditional way, a blood oath, the young man also answered negatively and clenched his hands into fists. When she began to suggest other methods, he suddenly exclaimed that he did not want any method. The young duke, ruffling his hair, addressed Marianne by name. He added that they should discuss this thoroughly sometime. And then, with fervor, he exclaimed that he sincerely, desperately believed that this was necessary, but Marianne did not understand what he was talking about, and therefore added that he could conclude a contract with her as it suited him. But the young man suddenly pulled out a red box and, giving it into the girl's hands, asked her to accept it. He explained that this was the communication sphere, and when he contacted her, she should give an answer. Watching the young duke leave, Marianne thought that he really was a good man, but rather peculiar. And also, before leaving, the girl wondered whether she needed to see the face of that man. She looked closely at the stone, which was hanging on a chain and held in her hand. In the dimly lit room, someone asked who had disturbed him this time. The man lying on the bed suddenly heard that she was hungry and asked in surprise what was wrong with that. The girl explained that she had spent all the money on a rented carriage, at which the man only chuckled and then asked where she was. Mariana stood in the square, near the fountain, and waited for someone. She was waiting for Zen, and upon seeing him, she waved her hand and told him to come to her. A man in a dark cloak with a hood pulled over his head walked towards the girl. Looking at him, Marianne thought she knew what he was thinking, even from such a distance. When Zen approached the girl, he reminded her that he asked her not to call him when he was sleeping. The girl was briefly embarrassed after receiving a rebuke from her friend. And then, smiling, she added that since she had already gone out, she wanted something tasty. Looking at him sweetly, she said that he knew that if she returned home, she would not want to go out. And also, Marianne added that this way, she would be able to see his face and extended her hand to the man's hood. With both hands, she removed the hood from Zen's head and looked into his green eyes. With sparkling eyes, Marianne said that he was as beautiful as ever. Zen, taking her hand, replied that he asked her not to tease him, and then he added that there was no need to take off his hood without asking, to which the girl replied that his face was so difficult to see in the middle of the day. When Zen put his hood back on, Marianne said that she didn't understand why he had to hide such beautiful eyes. The man turned to the girl and asked what she had been doing that she hadn't even eaten, and why she hadn't taken any money since she had gone out alone. Embarrassed, Marianne replied that she had been to dinner, but the atmosphere there was rather awkward. Looking at the girl with surprise, Zen asked her not to tell her that her mother was getting married again. Marianne looked at the man in bewilderment, not understanding why he was so worried. Zen, however, realized that he was right and covered his face with his hand in despair. Sighing wearily, the man added that, as expected, this woman had gotten herself into it again. They went to a cafe where vegetables and meat, cut into small pieces, were being grilled on coals. Sitting at a table opposite each other, they waited for it all to fry. The girl, holding meat on a skewer, asked Zen to stop staring out the window and eat with her. When the man looked at her, she added that when the food gets cold, it won't be as tasty, but he didn't respond to this. Then Marianne handed him a skewer of meat, but Zen waved her off and told her to eat herself, since she was a hungry fool who couldn't even have a normal lunch. In response, the girl noted that he could show politeness if he paid for everything. Closing her eyes and preparing to taste the pleasant taste, she bit into the meat. A blissful smile spread across her face, because this was just what was needed, and spicy street food was much better than expensive cooking. Looking at Zen, Marianne said that if he didn't come, then she would eat everything. Zen watched with a smile as the girl ate, enjoying the food. And then he asked Marianne if she came out because her mother called her. Embarrassed, the girl suggested talking about something else, but the man, drumming his fingers on the table, asked her not to change the topic. Marianne thought for a moment, not knowing how to say what was happening. And then, looking into Zena's eyes, she finally made up her mind and said that her mother was getting married again. Clutching his head, the man exclaimed that he knew it and asked what kind of parasite her mother had found this time. The girl replied sheepishly that he seemed like a nice man and that he had a son, a little older than her, and wondered whether she should tell him who he was later. Namely, that he is a duke among all of them, And besides, her mother may refuse the wedding, so it is worth waiting until the papers are signed. But Zen suddenly asked if this man was a nobleman, to which the girl, embarrassed, answered positively. Letting go of his head, the man remarked that he hoped that the low-class nobleman was better than those eccentric artists. Smiling, the girl noted that she thought her mother's marriage was for the best, because the house would be quiet until the newlyweds arrived. The man agreed with this and asked what she would say about her son, her fiancé. Namely, whether he behaved too arrogantly and whether he interfered with her, to which the girl answered negatively. At that moment, she remembered the white-haired, blue-eyed young man who was smiling joyfully at her. And so, Marianne, after thinking, replied that he seemed a little peculiar to her. Smiling, Zen noticed that she really wanted to say that he was another weirdo, to which he received a negative answer. And when Marianne added that he was looking at her rather strangely, Zen suddenly became serious. Surprised, he asked the girl if this bastard was a pervert, to which he again received a negative answer. After some time, when Marianne had eaten all the food, they left the cafe. The girl, looking at Zen's back, thanked him for the food. And then, smiling with a crumb on her face, she thanked him for coming for such a trifle. Hearing these words, Zen turned around and looked intently at the girl. And then he exclaimed that he knew that this vulgar freak was harassing her, to which the girl again answered negatively. She didn't understand why her friend was hanging such labels on him, and then suddenly she noticed how he reached out to her face with his hand. Touching the girl's face, Zen gently removed the crumb from her face. And then he added that if something happened, she should call him immediately and not suffer alone. Mariana looked at the man in surprise, because she did not expect such actions from him, and he added that he could handle anyone, even the Count. Standing opposite the man, the girl mentally thanked him again, thinking that all this was good, but her mother's new husband was the Duke. After my mother's modest meeting with relatives ended, preparations for the wedding proceeded quickly, but the fact that everything went quickly did not mean that the scale was small. The wedding venue was decorated with the wonderful affection of the girl's mother, and, judging by everything, it will be held at the highest level. As it turned out, the wedding venue will be the central temple where the coronation of the current emperor took place. Mariana, when she came to the temple, did not understand why her mother said that having nothing was also normal. Looking at how the temple was being decorated for the wedding, she realized that all of this was complete waste. The girl thought with resentment that her mother could live very luxuriously, but all this time she held back. Having decided that she was just going to look around today, Marianne did not notice how the young Duke was watching her from behind a column. The girl looked at the temple's decoration in surprise and suddenly heard someone cough. Turning around, Marianne saw the young Duke, who was covering his mouth with his hand and coughing slightly. At that moment, the girl wondered if Orion had also decided to check the hall after all. He was also a participant in the wedding. Marianne decided that they should pretend that they didn't know each other and were going about their own business so as not to cause any inconvenience, and she moved on. But as soon as the girl took a couple of steps towards the exit of the hall, she realized that she had been noticed. Marianne, with a heavy sigh, turned to the young Duke and greeted him. The young man, with shining eyes and a joyful smile, hurried to catch up with her. Approaching the girl, Orion said that a whole week had already passed since their meeting, and he was very glad that they had crossed paths with her. With these words, he slightly frightened the girl. Smiling, the young man asked if she was busy, because he had tried to contact her several times through the crystal ball, but she had never answered. At that moment, Marianne remembered that Orion had indeed given her a crystal ball. But she thought that the young man gave it to her out of politeness, so she simply left it somewhere on the table. Surprised that the young Duke actually wanted to contact her, Marianne wondered what she should do, because if she told the truth, he would be upset. At this time, Orion thoughtfully suggested that the ball might be broken, but it would not be difficult to fix. Looking at the young man, Marianne decided that she would have to tell him the truth after all. Embarrassed, she said that she thought the ball was merely a display of etiquette from the Duke's family. And Marianne didn't think that Orion would actually contact her, so she was overly careless. After the girl admitted it, she apologized. The young Duke, looking at the girl, suddenly asked why they couldn't discuss such an important thing, despite the fact that the deadline was tight and they had to hurry. And then Orion looked at her with his blue eyes and added that they would become a family. Hearing these words, Mariana wondered what her mother's marriage meant to her, because instead of accepting the new family, the girl thought that this would be another, temporary marriage. Looking at Orion, Marianne added that she was sure that in the ducal family there were certain customs and formalities, and she apologized for unintentionally ignoring them, but the young man said that was not what he meant. The young duke explained that he only wanted to show respect for her opinion and apologized for misleading the girl. Orion didn't understand the environment Marianne grew up in because she was so young, but her reasoning was completely adult. At this time, the young people suddenly heard a voice that said that he saw familiar outlines. It was the bishop who, walking towards them, asked if everything was okay with the two of them. The young men turned around and greeted him, asking how he was doing, to which the priest replied that he was always calm because the Lord protected him. He then congratulated them on becoming a family, and added that he kept crossing paths with Lady Marianne for good reasons. The bishop suddenly asked if this was the 5th time they had met on such an occasion, to which the girl answered positively, and added that a lot of time had passed since they asked him to be the master of ceremonies. The young duke, at this time leaning towards Marianne's ear, asked whether it was really the 5th time, since he had heard that it was only the 3rd. The girl explained that the first time ended in a scandal at the wedding, and the second one was thrown behind bars because of a tax debt right before the wedding. Mariana added that, to be precise, this was the 3rd time the young man grabbed his head, not understanding how this was possible. Noticing that Orion was holding his head, the bishop decided that he had said something he shouldn't have, and added that the quantity didn't matter. The priest added that the most important thing is that two families are united for a good reason, and when they both unite, being brother and sister, peace and quiet will reign in their home. After these words, the young people thanked the bishop, and he, getting ready to leave, said that they would see each other tomorrow. Looking at the stunned Orion, Marianne decided that he himself needed to understand everything, and she probably did too. Turning to the young duke, the girl said that she needed to go home to prepare for the next day's ceremony. Looking at Marianne, the young man was surprised that it was already so late and said that he would take her home. The girl, crossing her arms, resolutely refused to ride in his ornate carriage. But Orion, with enthusiasm, replied that he knew exactly what the problem was and that the carriage would now be different. Looking at the young duke with distrust, Marianne wondered what he had arrived on this time. Orion smiled and confidently told the girl that this time she would definitely like him. When she went outside, Marianne was very surprised to see the carriage because it really was completely different. The carriage was black, not at all conspicuous, and the young man also added that he did not take any knights with him. The girl, looking at the carriage, thought that externally it looked completely different than last time. Smiling, Orion noted that the carriage was the epitome of simplicity and asked if Marianne would now be able to ride in it. The girl realized that the young man had listened to her, and the duke's family also had strict etiquette, and they took the usual escort seriously, so she did not refuse. Placing her hand in the outstretched palm of the young duke, Marianne thanked him for his concern and said that she would receive her today. Opening the carriage door, the young man smiled and said that he hoped that she would also like the inside of the carriage. Orion explained that he had ordered the design for a smooth and comfortable trip, which surprised the girl. The young duke added that he had taken the carriage he had arrived in, made by the magic tower, and had furnished it modestly so that the girl would be more comfortable. He smiled and added that it had been a bit tight, but now it was rideable. At this time, Marianne stood with her eyes wide open in surprise and wondered if she had heard him correctly. Namely, the words of the young man that he ordered something in the magic tower. In it, the most ordinary order costs thousands of gold, and he ordered a luxurious carriage to be made, but so that it would look simple. The young man helped her into the carriage, adding that he would take her safely home. Marianne still couldn't get over the shock and didn't understand whether it was only the young duke who was like this, or whether all the nobles were like this too. Stepping out of the carriage and taking the girl's hand in his, Orion said that they had arrived. Marianne, accepting his help, got out of the carriage and thanked the young duke for his escort. Smiling at the girl, the young man replied that he didn't need any thanks, since he hadn't done anything special. Marianne responded by noting that he could speak to her more simply and call her by her name. Hearing the girl's words, the young duke's eyes opened wide in surprise. Covering his mouth with his hand, an embarrassed Orion suddenly asked her if they were really getting closer. Smiling, the young man happily added that he thought it would take much longer, and the girl did not understand what he was even thinking about. When Marianne asked if the young duke should return and continue preparing for tomorrow, the young man's eyes lit up with happiness because he decided that she was worried about him. Taking hold of the carriage door handle, Orion replied that he would go then. Although, on the other hand, the young duke became sad because he wanted to stay with the girl a little longer. And then he suddenly blushed, not daring to say anything, and the girl, seeing this, was very surprised. But then Orion pulled himself together and said goodbye to the girl that they would see each other tomorrow and called her by name. Marianne did not expect that the young man would call her by a different name, although she herself had given permission, and for a long time she watched the departing carriage. And from it came the cries of the young duke, who was calling on the coachman to go faster. The wind was blowing through Marianne's hair, and she thought that Orion was quite the weirdo. The majestic house of Duke Miller stood under a blue sky with white clouds floating across it. In the courtyard of the house, there was a place fenced off for the knights to train, and the vice-captain made sure that they delivered accurate blows. At this time, he suddenly heard someone calling him very loudly. Turning around, the man saw a young man who was quickly running towards him and asked what had happened. The vice-captain of the knightly order of the Miller ducal estate was named Bayhan Run. The young man told him that the captain had already returned. Hearing these words, the man became thoughtful, because he thought that he would return later. Be serious. Bayhan wondered if things were really not working out between the captain and his future half-sister, and he loudly ordered the knights to tidy everything up and get ready to greet the captain. When he appeared, the knights lined up and bowed their heads in greeting. The captain was the young Duke Miller, and as he walked into the courtyard and looked at the knights, the young man smiled. And then he walked along the path, on the sides of which stood knights, but did not say a word. The vice-captain, watching Orion as he walked into the house, suddenly noticed something strange. At this time, the knights, trembling with fear, asked Bayhan whether today's training would be a hellish test. At this time, the man thought about the young duke and did not understand what had happened to him that he had become like this. But upon hearing the knight's question, Bayhan smiled and said that they could train as usual. And then he added that apparently the captain was in an excellent mood today. The huge library was lined with bookcases full of books, and a beautiful clock hung on the wall. The young duke sat at the table, resting his face on his hand, and thought about the girl, deciding that now he must address her properly. Folding his hands together and closing his eyes, Orion dreamily said Marianne's name. At this time, the vice-captain came to him and asked if everything had gone well, because he looked lively. To this, the young duke responded positively and added that the girl could not take her eyes off him and was probably touched by his devotion. He also added that this was their chance to get closer, and Marianne told him to speak to her more casually. Bayhan, sitting down on the sofa, thought that his master was happy only because she allowed him to abandon formality in his speech. The man at that moment remembered high society, where connections decide everything. And then I thought they knew that Orion, known for his indifference, always had a frozen, icy face. And they can't even imagine that this face can be kind, sweet, or embarrassed. But then the young man interrupted his thoughts, saying that Bayhan's advice only slowed down the process, which surprised him greatly, and he asked what advice he was talking about. To this, Oren replied that the advice was that he should give flowers to the lady every time he met her, or that the young duke must amaze her with the most luxurious things. The young man glared at Bayhan and added that this made the girl feel burdened, and the vice-captain replied that it was strange and that these things would have pleased any noble lady. To this, Oren said that Marianne was different, and he could not put her in the same place as other ladies, and also added that Bayhan would never understand how smart and well-mannered his little sister was. The man was surprised that the young man was calling the girl his little sister, but then he remembered that family plays a special role in his life. The empire is divided into three noble factions. The first faction of the nobility, led by the Duke of Hastings, whose family has long been associated with the royal dynasty. The second faction of the empire, led by the Duke of Bolton, who swore allegiance to the crown. And the third, neutral faction, led by Duke Miller, who does not take anyone's side. Because of their strictly neutral nature, the Miller family always lived in seclusion, so Orion was always alone. The young man was alone for a long time after his mother died when he was little, and so Orion always wanted only one thing, namely a family with whom he could truly open his heart. Looking at the young man, Bacon decided that he was not the type of person whose head would be too turned by this. The man remembered Madame Tatiana's only daughter, who, unlike her mother, did not like being the center of attention. The vice captain thought for a moment. He was very curious as to why the girl felt this way about it. The man then asked the young duke if they would see each other tomorrow at his younger sister's wedding. Smiling and winking at the young man, he added that he would be interested in looking at her, and it would be nice if he at least greeted her. Hearing these words, Orion jumped up to Behan and grabbed him by the shoulder, calling him a freak. And then, crossing his arms over his chest with fury in his eyes, he angrily asked why he wanted to see his little sister. Slightly frightened by the young duke's reaction, Behan replied that he was simply curious about what kind of person she was. Orion, shouting that this thought alone was not pure, threw the man out of the room. Behan, sitting on the floor and looking at the closed door, decided that the young duke had a serious case. The next day, Mariana's mother's wedding in the central church was in all its splendor. Madame Tatiana, together with the Duke, received congratulations from a large number of guests. Mariana, together with her friend, stood to the side and watched the newlyweds. The girl's friend was amazed by Madame Tatiana and considered her very interesting. And then Reina added that it was the greatest wedding she had ever seen. Slightly embarrassed by her words, Marianne replied that she had never seen anything like it either. The girl hoped that this was the first and last such wedding, because it was so huge that it even took her breath away. Reina, smiling, added that nothing else could be expected from Madame Titi, and Marianne agreed with these words. Then the girl asked her friend if she really didn't call Zena. To this, Marianne replied that they couldn't force him to come, and that he didn't get along with his mother, and she also added that he was very unhappy and kept asking her about his mother's new fiancé. And Reina remembered that Zen had said about the girl's new brother that he was very strange, with deep pockets, who spent money on vicious things. Mariana, at that moment, remembered that she had tried so many times to explain to the man that this was not so and really hoped that he would soon come to his senses. Sitting down on the bench, the girl replied that Zen was mistaken about him because she knew better that he was different. And then she noted that it didn't matter, because people change every day. But Reina replied that perhaps in this case, it was important. And then, pointing somewhere behind her friend's back, she added that a handsome blonde man was staring at Mariana. With these words, she surprised the girl. Orion, seeing that he had been noticed, became slightly embarrassed and waved his hand to the girls, and Reina asked whether he would be Marianne's new brother. When the girl turned and looked at young Hertz, his eyes lit up with happiness. At that moment, Mariana grabbed her friend by the hands and, saying that she owed this man money, asked Rennie for a loan. Rennie agreed to give it to her, but asked why she needed it. The girl explained that while she was looking for the communication ball, Reina stepped on it and crushed it. Upon hearing this, her friend laughed, and Mariana, embarrassed, added that it was her fault, because she had been careless and she would return the money to her later. Reina smiled at this and advised her not to worry, as the amount was small. And then they laughed. She added that Reina Roki without money is worth nothing, and her father, the highest of the newly minted, who made a fortune in the mining industry. With cries of gratitude, Mariana threw herself on her friend's neck, and she, hugging her back, added that money was not a problem and that she just needed to say so if she needed help. And then, smiling at her friend, Rennie suggested intimidating the young duke using her money. Mariana was shocked by this proposal and decided that they would simply give him money for the sphere. The imperial temple where the wedding took place stood under the blue sky, striking in its grandeur. The priest wished the newlyweds that their journey would be full of joy and noble love, and also that their future days may be filled with boundless blessings. All the guests listened as the priest blessed Madame Tatiana and the Duke. Only Reina was unhappy that the wedding was taking so long because she was already hungry, and Marianne explained to the girl that the bishop himself had come to conduct the wedding. But it wasn't just about the holiday. The papacy was involved in a power struggle with the imperial family, and by blessing Duke Miller, they wanted to gain influence through a neutral faction. The girl looked at Rennie with a smile and noticed that it was not the bishop that irritated her. And then, pointing to the guy standing next to him, she asked if it was Burton Gremia there. Burton, as the youngest Holy Knight, has proven himself to be a man of incredible skill and humble nature. He was also incredibly attractive and won the hearts of many girls from the academy, but for Rennie, he was the most disgusting. Mariana, seeing her friend staring at the guy, asked if she was still angry at him because of the money, but she answered no. And then, with feeling, she added that she simply could not tolerate sycophants who cling to the authority of teachers, but Marianne knew that, in fact, the stakes were too high to play with students. And Burton simply followed the professor's instructions and confiscated all the money from her friend. And the one who reported this to the teachers was Zen, who was fed up with all this. Rennie, having said that she understood everything, suggested that they prepare to receive guests, to which the girl replied that she would go talk to her mother and change her clothes, and then return. With a joyful smile, the girl headed towards Madame Tatiana, but suddenly heard her name being called. It was the bishop who, after Marianne had greeted her, asked whether he should call her Lady Miller. When the man added that the registry entries had already been updated and that it would be appropriate, Orion approached them and greeted him. The bishop, smiling at the young people, asked how the young duke was doing and added that he was very glad to be able to congratulate them personally. The man also said that Lady Marianne was mature and well-mannered and would fit perfectly into the joy of the Miller household. The girl, listening to him, did not understand what all these compliments were about. But Orion, with a smile, agreed with the man, adding that their Marianne amazes with her joy and sense of smell, while the girl stood dissatisfied with the fact that the young man joined the conversation. Both the priest and the young duke smiled joyfully and said that it was a wonderful holiday. At this point, the bishop, coughing slightly, said that he wanted to introduce them to someone their age. Orion was very surprised, not understanding who they wanted to introduce them to, but then the man, waving his hand, called the young man over. This young man approached and said that it was an honor for him to meet Lady Marianne. He added that his name was Burton, and he was the heir of the Gremia family. The girl politely replied that she was pleased to meet him. She then introduced herself, saying that her name was Marianne Burton, and that she was the daughter of Madame Tatiana. Hearing how the girl introduced herself, the young duke was perplexed. After all, her mother had already gotten married, but Marianne does not use the surname Miller. Looking at Burton and the girl, the bishop noticed that they were a beautiful couple and suggested that they have some tea sometime. Hearing these words, Orion, covering Marianne with his body, sharply said that there was no point in arranging meetings for her, which greatly surprised her. And the young duke added that, as a student, the girl had many responsibilities that should not be distracted from. And then the young man asked Burton whether he, as a holy knight, should devote himself to training, to which he replied with a smile that guarding the bishop was also training. And then, bowing to Orion, he added that he would accept his valuable advice, to which the young man asked him to simply guard the bishop. After they said goodbye, Marianne wondered if the young duke was really defending the Miller family's political neutrality, including towards the papacy. And Orion at this time was outraged that the bishop dared to demand this from their Marianne, and was also glad that he was nearby. The young man smiled and thought that now no one was bothering them and they could talk. Orion said that they were both too focused, and suggested that she see her mother later. The girl, hearing these words, agreed and thanked him. And the young man added that since she needed to change clothes, he could accompany her. Marianne, looking at the smiling young duke, replied that this was not necessary. But Orion, with sparkling eyes, said that she had no reason to feel burdened at all, since accompanying her sister was part of an older brother's duties. Hearing the young duke's words about his older brother, Marianne froze in shock. And Orion added, also smiling happily, that since they were now one family, she could call him brother. For Marianne, the young man's request to call him brother was too unexpected. She turned her head away from the young man who stood in front of her, shyly waiting for her answer. But since the girl remained silent, Orion approached her and said that he understood that it might be awkward to start calling him brother right away. Therefore, he, pressing his hand to his chest, added that if it was difficult for her, then she could call him older brother for now. Marianne was still in shock from the young duke's proposal, but she found the strength to thank him. But then, unexpectedly, Orion suddenly smiled happily and said that he could wait a little while with his brother. In the living room there was beautiful, expensive furniture and silence, which was only broken by a small, quiet sound. The maid, who was carrying linen in her hands, was quietly humming to herself. But suddenly, someone quickly ran past her, almost knocking the girl off her feet. It was Marianne who, having closed the doors, stopped near them. The maid was surprised to see the young lady. Marianne stood with her back pressed against the door. She was frightened by something. Goosebumps ran across her body from the behavior of the young duke and, seeing the maid, the girl suddenly asked her where the emergency exit was. A little while later, Raina was sitting at the table and taking a sip of water, said that they were now the perfect couple. Marianne, who was sitting opposite her and holding a cookie on a fork, listened to her talk about how she now had a high social position. And then, winking at her friend, Raina said that she was rich. In response, Marianne said that they became friends, not because of her rank, but having authority is not a bad thing. Unexpectedly, Rennie suggested putting in their place those arrogant individuals who only do what they do to flaunt their middle names, to which the girl noted that she was also an aristocrat. But her friend looked at Marianne with a smile and said that she even had a plan. The girl listened to this with a smile because she could understand why Rennie looked at the nobles with contempt. The House of Rainey, having recently been ennobled, has long been ridiculed as the home of upstart merchants. And so, she understands why Rennie looks at the aristocrats with disgust, because they have suffered endless slander, contempt, and ridicule because of their origin. Standing with a fork in her mouth, Marianne noticed out of the corner of her eye that a young man was approaching them. It was Burton Gremya who, approaching the girls, said that he paid his respects to Lady Burton and Lady Roki. Marianne greeted the young man, but Raina made an unfriendly face and said that she did not expect to see him today. While young Lady Miller took the dishes from the maid's hands, Burton explained to Raina that Duke Miller had serious military power, and he should at least show intentions for good relations. Hearing this, the girl became angry and asked the young man if he had come here to play political games instead of offering prayers. And then she wanted to pounce on Burton, but Marianne held her friend back, while the young man looked at all this with bewilderment. Lord Gremya at this time smiled and suddenly said that Zen was probably furious right now. After imagining the evil Zen, Marianne decided to focus on finishing everything and leaving. And Burton added that the girl had been through a lot, experiencing the same difficulties. Noticing that it was already late and he still needed to say hello to someone, the young man said that he had to go. The girls standing nearby, noticing Burton, looked at him in surprise. Then they called out to Lord Gremmy and approached him, saying that they wanted to ask him something. Rennie, observing this, remarked with displeasure that girls only care about appearance, to which Marianne replied that her friend only needs money. But Raina pointed out that money is something different both inside and out, if it is not counterfeit. Looking at her friend with a smile, Marianne decided that she was the very picture of stability. At that moment, the girl heard someone call her name. Looking around, she saw the young duke, and he said that he wanted to introduce her to someone. There was a man standing next to Orion, and the young man explained that he served as vice-captain in their duchy order, the Blue Knights. And then he added that his name was Bacon Run and that he came from a clan, a desert tribe. Smiling at the girl, the man said that it was an honor for him to meet her because he had heard so much about her. Marianne greeted him and then introduced herself, saying that her name was Marianne Burton. Hearing the girl's old surname, Orion thought for a moment. After this, the young duke smiled, because he understood what he had to do. Looking at Marianne and Behan, he said that the meal was over and the reception of guests had begun. And then he asked the girl to use the last name Miller. Hearing this, the girl looked at him thoughtfully. Marianne realized that the young duke wanted her to introduce herself as Miller. She remembered that there had been several times when her last name had changed, but after some time it had become the old one again. Curtsying and smiling, the girl asked permission to introduce herself with her new surname, and thought to herself that introducing herself like that for the first time was rather strange. The young duke, hearing this, was simply happy. He was overwhelmed with emotion. Mariana, looking at the beaming young man, remembered that the only reason she didn't introduce herself by another last name was that her mother was quickly getting divorced. Suddenly, her friend approached the girl and, introducing herself as Reina Roki, added that she was pleased to meet him. Smiling, the young duke asked if Ruke was the house that had paved the trade routes with the eastern continent. And then, with a sparkle in his eyes, he added that he hoped that the girl would also be able to have a good time with his little sister. Reina looked at the young man and said with a smile that it was obvious. And then, also flashing her eyes in Orion's direction, she added that it was because she was her friend. Marianne and Burton watched in amazement as the young people stood opposite each other, the air between them sparkling. Putting her hand to her head, the girl did not understand why Rennie and Orion were focusing on such strange things, and besides, she just wanted to go home and rest. Some of the guests approached the young duke and, saying goodbye, said that they would go. Rennie took Marianne by the arm, but at that moment, Orion called out to the girl and said that he had heard that her mother had a lot of things that needed to be transported and offered to send her servants to help. Looking back, Mariana refused help, replying that her mother could handle it herself. The girl decided that she would ask Madame Tatiana to pack only the bare necessities, since she was moving out again, it would be inconvenient if she had many houses. And Marianne also thought it was strange to return home on the first day of marriage, at which time the young man again called her by name. And then he asked permission to help in any way he could because they were family. He surprised the girl with these words. And when the young duke said that she also had something to transport, she looked at him in bewilderment. Therefore, Marianne asked why he needed to move her things, and now the young man looked questioningly at the girl. And then Orion asked about the fact that she also had personal belongings, and the thought flashed through his head, could she really have lived without even a home to look after? In his imagination, he saw a girl holding a doll in her hands and telling her brother that she only needed her. Seeing the expression on Orion's face, Marianne turned to him and told him that there had been a small misunderstanding. The girl explained to the young duke that she had no intention of moving to the duke's domain. Hearing these words, Orion looked at Marianne in bewilderment. And then, lowering his head, he sadly asked why she didn't want to move. Marianne, at this time, looked at the young duke and wondered why he was so upset. She also wondered if they would be more comfortable if she did not live with them, imagining the young man giving flowers to her mother, who was being hugged by the duke. After this, the girl explained that she lives in the academy dormitory and will live there from the beginning of the new semester. Orion suddenly asked Marianne if, since they were a family, they shouldn't spend more time together. At this time, the girl looked at the woman with 2 children who were walking hand in hand with her home. Rennie, realizing that Marianne needed to talk to Orion, said that her father would be waiting in the carriage and walked away. And the girl, having said that this might be the case, explained to the young man that she would need to integrate into the educational process and therefore she wanted to stay in the dorm. Covering his face with his hand, the young duke added that there were a lot of things in the world more important than studying, but the girl objected to him because now, for her, studying was a priority. Orion, deciding to cheat, suddenly said that this was not very good because he hired a bunch of servants for both of them. Thinking that their mother was still moving in with them, Mariana said that she should have told them about this in advance. The young duke stood with a sad face, and Behan, who was watching him, chuckled, realizing that this was a trick. And so, putting his hand on Orion's shoulder, he said that now half of these people will lose their jobs. The girl was surprised by the vice captain's words, and he asked the young man whether those people had deliberately dropped out of school to help their brothers and sisters. Hearing these words, the girl was very upset. She could not believe that this could be. But then her friend came up to her, clicking her heels, asking her to let her do it. Putting her hand to her chest, the girl told Mariana not to worry, because they would get these people jobs in their company, in sales. Mariana, hearing this, asked if her friend was sure about this, to which she replied that she had nothing to lose. And then, Rennie added that, unlike some who get rid of people unnecessarily, she even takes care of their training. Upon hearing this, Orion was very upset. Closing his eyes, the young duke realized that his trick had not worked, and this time he had lost. Night fell. The shining stars illuminated a small, cozy house. Marianne, getting out of the carriage next to him, thanked Reina for giving her a ride. When the girl had already closed the door, her friend suddenly stuck her head out and called out to her. And then, with a serious face, she asked the girl to be on her guard. She explained to Marianne that if she was not careful, she would find herself drawn into the Duke's family. Rennie added that if something happened, she needed to call her immediately, after which the girls said goodbye. When Marianne entered the house, she was met by a maid who said that she was glad to see her back. When the girl asked if her mother was back, Dana replied that Madame Tatiana was at home and that she had come home drunk. Mariana, having said that she would go to her, went up to her mother's room. Entering the room, she saw a woman sitting on the windowsill with a bottle of wine in her hands. She silently looked out the window and looked somehow sad. Hearing someone enter the room, Madame Tatiana turned around and, seeing her daughter, asked with a smile if she was already here. Seeing a couple of empty bottles lying on the floor, Marianne noticed that the room smelled of alcohol. Approaching her mother, the girl asked why she was sitting on the windowsill, to which the woman replied, because she was very well. Mariana asked if it was because so many people came to the wedding, to which her mother asked in response if this caused her daughter inconvenience. The girl, hugging her mother, replied that as long as she was the star of the day and enjoying herself, then everything was fine, and besides, she liked such things, to which the woman, smiling, agreed. Then, Marianne laid her mother on the bed and carefully covered her with a blanket. In her sleep, the woman called her daughter lovely, and the girl realized that her mother was very drunk. At that moment, Marianne thought that the woman liked it when it was noisy and lively around her, and it was difficult to get along with her, but if the one she loved was happy, who was she to judge? Suddenly, Madame Tatiana opened her eyes and, calling her daughter by name, said that this was the last time. Hearing these words, Marianne's eyes widened in surprise, and the woman, falling asleep, promised that this marriage would be the last. Smiling, the girl thought that her mother had never said such words before, and did this mean that she was in love with the Duke? After adjusting the blanket on the woman, Marianne wished her good night. The next morning, servants loaded Madame Tatiana's numerous belongings into the carriage. The woman, adjusting her hair, which was playing in the wind, asked her daughter if she was sure that she did not want to go with her. Mariana resolutely replied that she was more comfortable living in the dorm, and thought to herself that she no longer wanted to associate with the Millers. Suddenly, the girl's mother took her chin in her hand, and then she lightly touched her nose with her finger, smiled, and asked whose smart and capable daughter this was. Mariana, who didn't expect this from her mother, said that they would see her. After this, the girl thought, remembering her mother's words that this was the last time, she decided that something was wrong here. Marianne didn't know if the woman remembered what she had said, but after her words, saying "see you later" didn't seem appropriate. She looked at her mother with some thoughtfulness and sadness, and Madame Tatiana seemed happy. She waved her hand to her daughter and asked her to take care of herself. Looking at her mother, who had already sat in the carriage, she hoped that she would avoid any quarrels with the Duke and his son. Waving her hand at the departing carriage, the girl decided to think about her problems, of which she had plenty. In one of the empty classrooms of the academy, Marianne's voice was heard, thanking the professor before leaving. Leaving the classroom, the girl, holding the papers in her hands, breathed a sigh of relief. After all, she finally received a letter of recommendation from the professor. Remembering her conversation with him, she didn't expect him to notice that she was deliberately keeping her grades above average. And also, Marianne was glad that the professor turned a blind eye to this. Thinking that she simply didn't want to stand out too much, the girl didn't notice and collided with someone. The whole pile of papers that she was carrying in her hands scattered into separate sheets. The girl was upset because she had just put them together correctly, and now everything was mixed up. The young man she bumped into apologized, saying that he was in a hurry and didn't notice her, and began to help her collect the sheets. It was Trevor Barrel who, handing the paper to the girl, asked if she was okay. Mariana, remembering that this guy would be taking the promotion exam with her, replied that everything was fine. Hearing Marianne's answer, the young man looked at her with slight thoughtfulness. Then, smiling, Trevor said he had planned to go over the same topic. Seeing that the girl did not understand what he was talking about, the young man explained that he had also taken the theme of the land of death. Marianne looked at him in surprise because she thought that he would choose the simplest and most popular topic. She remembered that Trevor Barrel was a top student who hadn't given up his position all year, and there were also rumors that he would be adopted into a family from Ember County. In addition, he is a popular student, popular with everyone in the academy, and knowing how unnoticeable she herself is, this was very unexpected for the girl. At that moment, the young man, saying that they were worthy rivals, offered to seal it with a handshake. After that, the girl said that her friend was waiting for her and she had to go. She left, and Trevor watched her for some time. Seeing Rennie looking out the window, Marianne asked in surprise what she was doing there. The girl didn't understand what was so interesting her friend saw outside the window. Suddenly, Rennie grabbed her and pulled her to the window, telling her to look at that madness. Marianne, looking out the window, saw a carriage, even a little modest. And she told Rennie that everyone comes to the academy on maps and there is nothing in this, to which the girl replied that this is not just a carriage. And then she added that the carriage only looks modest, but in fact it is made of magically treated wood so that it will last longer. And it is also drawn by horses whose pedigree you won't find at any race. And if you look at the coachman, you can immediately see from his posture and appearance that he exudes aristocracy and is clearly well-mannered and holds himself with dignity. Suddenly, Rennie, screaming that she had to find something like that, ran towards the exit. Marianne looked after her and did not understand what was happening. But then the girl decided that it didn't matter, and the thought flashed through her head that maybe this carriage had come for her. Leaving the academy, Marianne saw Bacon standing by the carriage, smiling, accompanied by a knight. At that moment, the girl realized that they had come for her after all. With a bow, the vice-captain said that the young duke invited Marianne to have a cup of tea with him with relief. She realized that this was not a kidnapping, but an invitation. Also, Behan added that they tried to contact her through communication tools, but she did not respond and returned all letters with an invitation. Marianne thought it was because she wanted to focus on preparing for the exam. At that moment, she heard the man say that the young duke was impatiently awaiting her arrival. The girl replied that she understood everything, and the vice-captain added that he would accompany her in comfort. The carriage rolled along the road along which stood beautiful houses. Marianne, sitting in it, thought that she had actually ridden in this carriage. Closing her eyes and supporting her face with her hand, the girl realized that it would be difficult for her to prepare for the exams. After all, first of all, her mother unexpectedly got married, right before the exams. And then my stepbrother started to bother me with his tea parties. When the carriage stopped and the girl, accompanied by Behan, went to have tea, the man said that the young duke would be happy. But when the girl was leaving, her friend saw it from the window. At that moment, Rennie realized that the carriage had been sent by young Duke Miller. And then she asked Zen, who was sitting with his face covered by a book, whether it was difficult to cover the carriage with a color-preserving and storage spell. But the man didn't even react to her question, which made the girl very angry. She screamed that he was a scoundrel and tried to lift him up. When she succeeded, Zen replied that it was not difficult if there was a wizard on top. Then he added that since he was not with them, it meant that the magician was a mid-level magician. Renee thoughtfully drew out that this was still the Miller's house, and Marianne was involved with a rather serious rival. When Zen heard about the girl and asked Rennie what she had to do with it, she replied that she was very irritated that he answered immediately when it came to Marianne. Seeing the man's questioning look, she added that it was all because of Madame Titi's son, by marriage. And then smiling, she said that she thought Marianne would figure it out on her own, and besides, they were relatives. At that moment, Zen used a spell, causing the girl to ask him what he was doing. The man used a spell to determine that Marianne was on the top floor of the coffee shop, and Rennie exclaimed that he still hadn't removed the locator spell from her friend. The girl, seeing Zen preparing a teleportation spell, screamed that he was a crazy idiot if he went there and caused a commotion. But the man did not listen to the girl and continued to cast the spell. Rennie reached out her hand and wanted to stop him, but before she could, Zen disappeared. Covering her face with her hand, the girl thought sadly that this was really irritating her. As she was thinking that it wasn't her fault, and she wouldn't have had time to stop him, Lord Gremia entered the room. Looking back and seeing him, an interesting thought flashed in Rennie's eyes. At this time, in a private room of the coffee house on the top floor, sat the young Duke. He held a menu in his hands, getting ready to see what he should order. Finally, Orion chose black coffee, and then asked Marianne, who was sitting opposite him, what she would like. The girl, with a blank look, replied that she would have orange juice. The young man was very happy, and asked if Marianne really liked orange juice. She confirmed this, although in her mind she thought that she ordered it because Orion himself wanted it. After all, 10 minutes ago, the girl watched as the young Duke noticed that there was orange juice on the menu, but did not order it because he was the older brother. A few minutes later, the waiter brought a cup of coffee for the young man. The young Duke suddenly asked if classes at the academy ended at this time. The girl, surprised by the question, explained to Orion that she usually finishes later because she has to prepare for exams. Then he asked if she had made any friends at the academy, to which Marianne replied that she had already introduced her to her friend, Lady Reyna. Hearing this name, the young man became thoughtful. Orion also said that he heard that she was preparing for promotion exams, and then he added that he knew a genius who had been admitted early and had become a senior, and then he suggested asking him to help her with her studies. Orion smiled, referring to himself, but Marianne did not understand who he was talking about. Smiling, the girl tried to understand what the young Duke was trying to convey to her, and so she replied that everyone should make an effort to study independently, and the young man, lowering his head, agreed that this was a rather noble idea. And when Orion added that if there was an assistant who could help improve skills, the girl decided that she understood what he was talking about. Imagining the young man menacingly asking why she didn't have an A+, Marianne decided that he apparently wanted to strictly control everything in order to preserve the prestige of the Duke's family. Orion only wanted to teach his little sister to study, but the girl had already figured out that since the honor of the ducal family was at stake, he would be strict with this, and it would be easier for him if there were clear results. Thinking that she needed to get ready, Marianne stood up abruptly, saying that it was time for her to go, which surprised the young man. While putting on her jacket, the girl added that she needed to prepare for exams, and she would try to do without a mentor. Upon hearing this, Orion said that she must have misunderstood him. The young Duke stood up abruptly and, leaning his hands on the table, asked Marianne to stop. And then the young man loudly exclaimed that in life, grades are not the only thing that matters. At that moment, a bright golden glow appeared in the room. The young Duke shouted to Marianne to move away and hide while he prepared for battle. The girl was very surprised by her stepbrother's behavior. At that moment, Zen appeared in the room, and upon seeing him, Orion exclaimed that he was a sorcerer. The man, turning to the young Duke, told him to give him the girl behind him, and she realized that this was her friend. To this, Orion responded with a decisive refusal, and drawing his sword, said that he would protect Marianne, while the girl tried to explain that this was her best friend. The men began to quarrel among themselves, not paying attention to the girl. So she yelled loudly for them to stop, and then explained to Zen that this was her older brother, and to Orion that this was her best friend. To this, the sorcerer replied that he knew him, because he was the one whom Marianne called a pervert who undresses people with his eyes. Bacon and Burton, who entered the room at that moment, were very surprised to hear these words. Marianne was also surprised because she didn't remember when she had called the young Duke that. Suddenly she heard Orion call her name and turned to look at him. And the young man, blushing deeply, asked if this was really true. The girl looked at him in shock, not knowing what to answer her stepbrother. And then she grabbed her head, tears rolled from her eyes, and she cried out, denying it. The waiter brought the order and placed cups of tea on the table, behind which on one side sat Marianne and her half-brother, on the other, Zen and Burton, while Behan remained standing next to the master. Looking at everyone, Lord Gremia thought that he felt somehow awkward being here. Marianne, embarrassed, tried to explain to Zen that it wasn't her. But the man sat with his arms folded across his chest and stared at the girl, making her feel uneasy. When Marianne apologized to Orion, he noted that everything was fine and everyone could stumble over words during a conversation, and Zen wanted to say something, but Burton covered his mouth with his hand. A few minutes later, the girl, raising her cup of tea, asked why Lord Gremia had come at all. The young man said that Rennie, having grabbed him by the lapels, sent him here to keep an eye on Zen, who might do something stupid. At this time, the young duke decided to clarify whether these two were seeing each other for the first time. To this they responded positively, explaining that Zen asked them to pretend they didn't know each other because Burton's popularity was stressing him out. Orion realized that all four of them were close enough to make such statements. The lowered Mariana confirmed the conclusion of her half-brother. And then, watching Zen threaten Burton, I realized that he couldn't do anything. This is how the tea party that took place on the top floor of the coffee shop ended. A few days later, in the hallway of the academy, Rennie stood with her arms folded across her chest. When she saw Marianne, her eyes lit up with joy. Calling out to the girl, she asked how everything went on the first exam. To this, Mariana replied that everything was fine, and it was not difficult, and remained the one on which the research topic was tested. She explained that the Land of Death was a complex topic, and she was going to look for materials in the young duke's library. The Land of Death refers to a mystical, corrupted land on the continent that is teeming with monsters, and because it is a dangerous region, many have lost interest in it. Suddenly, Marianne heard someone call her name. Turning around, she saw Treville Barrel, who asked how the exam went, and mentally, the girl wondered what his problem was. But out loud, Marianne answered that it was not bad, but the young man shared that he thought he had barely succeeded, and asked if she would mind studying with him. The Miller family's stately home stood under a blue sky. Near him stood a carriage from which Marianne emerged, and the servants greeted her with a bow. Then the girl heard quiet steps and words of greeting. It was Behan, who said that he would take her to the library, where all the materials had already been prepared. And then, smiling at Marianne, he added that while Orion was gone, she could feel calm. Then the girl, accompanied by the vice-captain, walked along the corridors of the house. At this time, her thoughts were about her past meeting with Treville Barrel. She remembered his offer, and that if the class schedules didn't match, he would leave immediately. After the young man left, Marianne asked Rennie if it was possible that he knew her real name and personal life. To this, her friend responded negatively, saying that her personal life was safe, since even the professor could not find information. Therefore, walking down the corridor, the girl wondered why Treville was acting so friendly. Suddenly, the girl heard Behan call her name and say that they had arrived. Looking up, Marianne was very surprised because she saw a huge library in which there were a large number of books. Thinking about how spacious it was here, the girl looked back at Bacon and saw how he was pleased with the effect he had produced. Then she looked at the table and saw a large stack of papers there. Coming closer, the girl realized that this was a complete collection about the Land of Death, and that this was already enough to take and use. Closing her eyes, Marianne imagined how much effort it would take to live up to these expectations. Unexpectedly, the girl heard Behan ask if it touched her. Marianne answered positively and said that she was starting to feel uneasy, and then she added that with such support, she would give her all to meet their expectations, which surprised the man. And he suddenly asked if she was a person who always wanted to repay kindness with kindness. And then, Behan explained that the reason for their actions was not good grades at the academy. Lost in thought, the man added that at the moment, their commander had been feeling sad for several days. At that moment, a red carriage drawn by horses drove up to the entrance of the estate. From it came out a young duke, who was greeted by servants who told him that a guest was waiting for him. When he asked who it was, the servant bowed and replied that Lady Marianne was here. Hearing this, Orion was delighted, and Behan explained to the girl that the young man was sad because he had failed to impress his younger sister. Looking out the window, the man added that he only hoped for one thing. After all, he saw that the young duke was running towards the library. Therefore, looking at the girl, Behan said that the person she would meet when she left this room did not need nice greetings. A kind attitude was enough, but Marianne did not understand what he meant. At that moment, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Looking back, the girl saw the young duke, who, out of breath from running, entered the room. The young man smiled at Marianne and invited her to stay for dinner. The girl, looking at Orion, understood the words of the vice-captain of the knights, that if she feels at peace only after she repays the kindness shown, then it is worth it. There were many different dishes on the table, and Orion offered the girl to eat whatever she wanted. Since he did not know what she liked, he ordered everything to be prepared. Mariana, with wide eyes, looked at all this variety in surprise and thought that it was too much. Remembering how an hour ago the girl had agreed to dinner, the thought flashed through her head that she should have refused. But sighing, she decided that the young man was taking this very seriously, and that it would be impolite to refuse the invitation to dinner. While cutting the meat, Marianne realized that first she needed to figure out how he was staring. And Orion sat and looked at the girl with a look that checked whether his little sister was eating well. Therefore, Marianne inquired whether the young duke had just returned from his official duties, to which she received a positive answer. And Orion suddenly asked what brought the girl here, to which she replied that she came to use the office for a short while to prepare for exams. Orion was very surprised to hear this, and asked if she was alone, to which Marianne replied that Mr. Rune had helped her. The young duke was surprised by her words and asked if she was talking about Behan Rune, to which he received a positive answer. Angered and clenching his fists, Orion said that Behan told him he was on sick leave because he was sick and called him a dog. Marianne did not understand why the young man called him that, and suddenly heard the maid's stifled laughter. The girl turned to the maid, who, seeing this, bowed slightly to her. At that moment, Marianne realized that everyone in this estate was looking at her with warmth. Even earlier, when they walked in the hall, everyone smiled at her and greeted her. Marianne didn't understand why this was happening, because she considered herself a small pebble underfoot in the miller's house. And the girl also realized that, no matter how ironic it may sound, she was the most emotionless one here. Putting down her fork, Marianne thought that she would prefer to be spoken to formally. At this moment, the young duke addressed the girl by name. She was looking at her plate when she heard the young man ask her why she hadn't spent the night here last night. Smiling, Orion added that it was a modest place, but there were rooms to spend the night, and he had also hired a cook to prepare late-night snacks. The girl looked at him in surprise after he said that he had hired someone else for her. Looking at Orion, Marianne honestly answered that she doesn't go to sleepovers. And then the girl added that she did not understand why the young lord was so worried about her. After all, her mother's marriage is strictly her business, which does not concern the girl. Hearing these words, the young man looked questioningly at Marianne and asked what she meant. To this, the girl replied that when her mother and the duke separated, they would also lose contact. After these words, Orion looked at the girl with some hidden sadness, and Marianne, lowering her head, thought that she was also behaving strangely, because usually she does not share her experiences. She suddenly remembered how the young duke had been delighted that they were becoming closer when she had allowed him to call her by her first name, and the way he said goodbye, calling her Marianne for the first time, and smiling, saying that they would see each other at the wedding. As she began to eat, she decided that everything was going as planned with this man. When the girl had finished eating and was already wiping her mouth with a napkin, Orion suddenly addressed her by name. And then, he said seriously that he didn't think everything revolved around their parents' relationship. The young man added that it was just like he didn't choose to be his father's son. And also, he said, the fact that they were now a family also did not depend on them. Orion asked the girl to accept the fact that they were one family and try to get to know each other better. Smiling, the young duke added that he became incredibly happy when she became his sister. And then Orion admitted that although she didn't know, he had seen her before, at the New Year's reception. Mariana remembered that it was her first time at a banquet, and her mother was delighted because it was the first time she had been invited to a banquet. Seeing her so beautiful, Marianne also wanted to go to the banquet. The girl admitted that she did not remember talking to anyone at the time, to which the young man admitted that he did not approach her. And then Orion explained that he was just watching her from the side. He noticed her because she was a child who clapped for her mother alone, although everyone was silent, trying to maintain appearances after such a grand performance. The young man, closing his eyes, remembered that she was alone, clapping her hands, smiling joyfully. And yet, not paying attention to other people's glances, she calmly enjoyed her food. It was then, as Orion wandered around the room and studied it, that he found the little child very interesting. He explained that instead of following strict manners, the way they enjoyed the banquet was what made it entertaining. The girl remembered that this happened because she did not yet know banquet etiquette. Orion added that she did not have high expectations of him, and she did not demand anything. No matter what others said, she didn't judge him by his cover. So everything seemed simpler, and he wanted to treat her better, Orion added with a smile. The young man also admitted that he had been waiting for her for a very long time. He asked to find out everything about her, and when they brought him the documents, he was very happy. It was then that he realized that he wanted to see the child named Marianne again. Taking a book from the shelf, the girl thought that today was the third day since she started visiting the Duke's house after dinner with Orion, thanks to which her preparation for the second exam went smoothly. After all, there was not only material that was difficult to obtain, but also Lord Rune's colorful descriptions of the land of death. The Duke's library was, in fact, an ideal place for study, but there was one small detail that the girl could not help but notice. And that detail was the young Duke hanging around her. Marianne called out to Orion, and he, asking if she needed help, jumped up joyfully because she had paid attention to him. At that moment, the girl said that Bacon had left to check on how the knights were training, and she asked Orion if he also had business, to which the young man answered positively and added that they were not urgent. Marianne asked him not to put off his affairs because of her, to which Orion, smiling, asked if he was really interfering that much. Embarrassed by such a direct question, Marianne answered positively. The young Duke, hearing this, said that he would sit further, to which the girl remarked that the very fact that she saw him distracted her. Then Orion showed her a place where she couldn't see him, and asked what if he stood there. But Marianne, putting her hands on her hips, shouted for him to leave, and if she needed help, she would call him. And then she added that the presence of the young man made her uncomfortable. Upon hearing this, he was very upset. And then Orion walked towards the library exit, his head down in frustration. The girl thought that this might seem heartless, but preparing for exams was very important to her, and she needed to return to her studies. In the evening, getting out of the carriage that brought her home, Marianne thought that she had been so carried away by her studies that she had not noticed how dark it had become. When the girl thanked the coachman and the carriage drove away, she suddenly noticed fireflies. Marianne understood what this meant and, raising her head, saw Zen. The man, taking off his hood and seeing the girl, called her by name. And then, coming down from the roof, he asked why she returned so late, to which Marianne replied that it just happened that way. And then she asked Zen how long he had been waiting for her, to which the man replied that not very long. But the girl did not believe him and suspected that he had skipped dinner, but the man denied it. But she didn't believe it, so she said she would cook dinner, and as she was already going up the stairs, Marianne added that they had wonderful seafood. And when Zen, who was following her, answered that he liked meat more, the girl cheerfully replied that he should eat what they gave him, because she bought these products thinking about herself. After some time, Marianne put a plate with prepared food on the table, and the man asked if she had eaten. To this the girl replied that she had eaten at the young Duke's estate, and Zen indignantly asked her not to say that she had eaten with him, because she did not know what was on his mind. Marianne, propping her head up with her hand, noticed that how she spends time with her son, her mother's husband, does not concern Zen. The man, holding a fork in a plate, suddenly said that he checked Orion. He really is a weirdo, and asked her to be on the alert. Mariana replied that she understood everything, and looking at the man, she thought that she felt good when she watched him eat. Remembering the expensive food at the estate, the girl realized that the simple and inconspicuous food prepared for Zen evoked more pleasant emotions. Looking at the man, she guessed that it might be because they had been close since childhood. At that moment, Zen suddenly asked Marianne what she was thinking about and whether she wanted to tell him about it. And then the man added that she had been going to the young duke's estate for several days and asked if he had really said something to her. Mariana, remembering that she hadn't told anyone about this, asked if Zen was still following her, to which he answered positively and added that it was for protection, and if she didn't like it, he would stop. The girl replied that everything was fine. Then the man suggested telling her what she was thinking about, since half of her problems were usually trivial. Thinking that Zen wanted to hear her vent, Marianne explained that Orion had said that they had become a family, not because any of them wanted it. And also, since they are one family, they need to learn to understand each other. Hearing this, Zen asked what the problem was, to which the girl replied that she wanted the family to be something special. Thoughtfully, Marianne added that if the young duke saw relationships with others and a connection with her mother as something like a family, then she would become sad about it. Zen, folding his arms across his chest, replied that if she felt that way, then that was how it was, to which the girl asked if what Orion had said didn't make sense. But the man suddenly said, no matter whether his words made sense or whether it was true, she wanted to play family with him. Lowering her head and thinking, Marianne replied that she didn't know. Remembering the young lord and his actions, she realized that he truly considered them one family. She also thought about the people around her who constantly upset her. At that moment, she realized that this wasn't bad and was surprised that she even thought so. Zen looked attentively at the thoughtful girl and then decided to clarify something. He asked if he and that guy fell into the water at the same time, who would she save? Standing up, Zen added that they should take into account that none of them could swim, to which the girl replied that she would ask Burton to save them, since she couldn't swim either. Pinching Marianne's cheek, the man remarked that at such moments she should say that she would save him without looking back. And then he added that she shouldn't tell him that she felt the same way about the man she had known since childhood as she did about the guy she had recently met. Marianne exclaimed that she would save him first because her cheek hurt. Having let the girl go, he said with relief that he should have told her that right away. But the girl did not understand why he was competing with the young lord. Then Zen pulled the hood over his head, and Marianne exclaimed, "Is he really leaving already?" to which she received a positive answer. Looking at the girl, he asked her to pass her second exam. Okay. And then he threw the ring to the girl, which surprised her greatly. Zen explained that it was just a ring that helped with concentration. Mariana, holding the ring in her hand, asked if this was really why he came here, but the man simply replied that he was leaving. The girl, smiling happily, realized that the man was simply embarrassed by his actions. Putting the ring on her finger, she realized that it fit perfectly and was surprised that Zen was very attentive to such details. Remembering the necklace that Rennie had given her, she realized that the same thing had happened to him. Remembering Zen, Marianne was convinced that everyone really did support her. Clutching her hands to her chest, the girl decided that she had to work hard to justify their support. Few students are interested in the early admission system due to the high difficulty of the exam. Only a few manage to pass, and if you fail, you can only retake it in 2 years. Without sufficient confidence, few dare to try, which is why the exam is only taken by nobles or students of a special class who have received an advanced education. Mariana came to the class where they were taking the exam and sat down at a desk. An unfamiliar girl approached her and said hello. Smiling, she said that she had not seen Mariana before and asked what grade she was in. It was expected for the girl that some people would be interested if someone like her, barely noticeable, showed up for the promotion exam. So Marianne replied that she was from the general group, Class B, and upon hearing this, the stranger exclaimed that this was the class where Treville studied. She didn't even imagine that anyone else besides him would be taking the exam, and asked the girl what her name was. Marianne, smiling, introduced herself with the temporary fake surname Hopin. She added that she is a commoner and her grades are average. Mariana realized that after such words, she was no longer so interesting, since she did not represent anything special. Therefore, having wished the girl good luck and noting that the courage of commoners deserves respect, the stranger walked away from her. Marianne didn't care what she said, because it was important to her to graduate as early as possible. Taking out the piece of paper and picking up a pen, the girl thoughtfully looked at the ring given to her by Zen. Marianne wondered if it would be better to take off this ring. It was legal to wear it, but if it helped her in the exam, it seemed unfair to her. Trevor Beryl walked confidently into the classroom where the exam would take place. Having looked back and responded to all the greetings, the young man looked at Marianne. He waved his hand in greeting and greeted the girl. She was slightly surprised by his behavior and thought that he had become more familiar in the last week. Not very happy about this, the girl hesitantly responded to his greeting. Approaching the table where Marianne was sitting, the young man asked if she would mind if he sat with her, and she wondered why he had become so friendly now. And Treville, smiling at Marianne, suddenly asked if she had prepared well for the exam. And then he added that he hadn't had time to prepare as he wanted, so he was a little worried. Smiling, the girl replied that she had noticed this. Marianne looked at the young man and thought that he was smiling kindly, but something was confusing her. Suddenly, a girl approached their table and asked Treville if she could borrow his pen. The young man gave her his hand with a smile, and the girl, delighted by this, thanked him. And then, pressing her hand to her chest, she looked at Marianne, who suddenly realized that she wanted to make her jealous. She understood that Treville was popular, but this was beyond any bounds. And the young man, looking in Marianne's direction, suddenly said that she had a cool pen, which surprised her. Treville added that the first pen with the Roki Company coat of arms was released in a limited edition. To this, Marianne replied that her friend Reina Roki had given it to her, and after she said this, the young man remembered that he had seen them together. Suddenly, a girl sitting nearby exclaimed that she understood why the name Marianne Hopin seemed familiar to her, because Reina had bet everything she had on her. Mariana overheard the students talking about how more than half the academy was already involved in betting on exams, and the winnings were unrealistic, even if they guessed right out of 3. The girl was shocked that Reina was back betting. She didn't expect that after her friend was punished for it, she would do it again, and she told Marianne not to worry about the exam, but behind her back she ruined everything again using her name. And the students whispered that if Reina bet everything on Marianne, it meant she had talent. And they also said that Roki didn't bet a penny on Trevor Beryl, the strongest candidate. Mariana, listening to all this, cried inside she wanted to return to her peace and quiet. The professor who came to conduct the exam said that everyone looked tense and that this was what was needed. The man added that if they wanted to pass the exam, they would need a fighting spirit. He also said that everyone who is here day after day shows a good attitude towards studying and excellent results, and they are exactly the ones who want to grow and develop further. The professor added that the academy is ready to provide all opportunities for such students. He also reminded that everyone knows perfectly well that if they fail the exam, they will only be able to retake it in 2 years. And if this happens, then not only will they lose 2 years, but also their honor will be trampled, and he said that they should remember that everyone here is a rival. Looking at the clock hanging on the wall, the professor announced the start of the exam. There was silence in the classroom, only the scraping of pens and the steps of the professor, who walked around the classroom with his hands behind his back, could be heard. Marianne, feeling the examiner's gaze, thought that he was very frightening. But the girl suddenly realized that he did not frighten her at all, and realized that it was thanks to the young Duke. After all, having him staring at her while she was preparing made it much easier for her to concentrate, something she hadn't even imagined would come in handy. Suddenly, Marianne felt so much pain that she even closed her eyes. The girl could not understand what had happened and why her head suddenly began to hurt so much. The teacher, noticing that Mariana had stopped writing, asked what the problem was. The girl smiled and replied that everything was fine, her hand was just shaking from nerves. And she thought to herself that if she couldn't cope with this, then how would she survive at all? And then she wondered where this strange headache came from. At this time, the student who was sitting behind Treville suddenly turned to the professor and said that Beryl was behaving strangely. Mariana, hearing this, turned to the young man, her eyes wide in surprise. Trevor sat there with a blank look in his eyes as the students shouted at him to wake up. The professor, approaching the young man, noticed that he was unconscious and stopped the exam. Marianne couldn't get over the shock as she watched Treville being taken away. She didn't understand what had happened here and what would happen now. All the students were wondering what was happening out of the blue and if anyone had seen what happened to Treville. One of the guys said that there was black blood coming out of him and it was everywhere. Marianne was scared because she didn't expect anything like this to happen. At this time, the professor said that everyone could go home and that later he would give instructions on how to take the exam. As the students left the classroom, they wondered if the exam time would change, but Mariana decided that the main thing was to calm down, go back, and rest. Suddenly, the stranger who had approached her before the exam started approached her and looked at her. The girl's gaze was completely empty, and her pupils were greatly enlarged. When Marianne looked at her questioningly in response, she said nothing, and then, still with the same absent look, she simply walked out of the classroom. The girl, looking after her, did not understand what had just happened. When Marianne left the academy for the courtyard, she was met by Rina Roki. When her friend asked how the exam went, the girl realized that she didn't know that it had been suspended and that the professors were keeping everything a secret. Rennie, smiling, asked if Marianne had wiped everyone's noses, and Marianne remarked that her friend seemed very inspired by this exam. And then the girl asked her friend directly if it was because of the bet. And then Marianne, smiling, asked if Rennie had bet on her, which surprised her greatly. Then Reina, embarrassed, replied that it wasn't really about the bet, but that she also wanted to be happy for her. Mariana said that she would not stop her, because it was just fun and did not harm anyone. And then she asked whether Rennie had organized bets on who would pass the exam. Marianne added that she was glad that her friend was helping her, but she didn't want her to bet on her Reina promise that this wouldn't happen again. And then she asked the girl what about the winnings, but she replied that no one won this time. She surprised Rennie with these words, and then explained that this time they hadn't even finished the exam itself. When Mariana started talking about the exam, she suddenly felt a severe headache, which even made her stagger. Rennie called out her name in alarm when she saw this. Mariana realized that it was the same pain as during the exam and began to fall. Suddenly, Zen appeared next to her and, catching the girl, prevented her from falling. In the room, on the sofa, Marianne was lying with her eyes closed, and a man was sitting next to her. After some time, the girl opened her eyes and made a weak sound. Hearing him, Rennie, who was sitting next to Burton, jumped up and asked if Marianne was awake. When the girl sat up and asked her friend what was going on, she heard a familiar voice that said that she could lie down a little longer. Turning around, the girl saw Zen, who was sitting on the armrest of the sofa and looking at her with concern. When she said she was already fine, Burton offered her a glass of water. Marianne thanked everyone, and Lord Gremia noticed that her complexion was better than before. Placing his hand on the girl's forehead, Zen noticed that the temperature had finally dropped. Marianne looked at Rennie and asked what had happened to her, to which her friend replied that she had lost consciousness while they were talking. At that moment, the girl remembered that she had felt a severe headache, just like during the exam. She understood that she was not at all frail, and that fainting without reason was not normal, and she was also worried about what happened during the exam. Someone asked if there was something wrong with the room where the exam was being held, and this question surprised Zen. Marianne explained that Treville had passed out just like her, and Burton, hearing about the young man, was very surprised that he had taken the exam with her. The girl confirmed this and added that he suddenly passed out and the exam was cancelled. Here, Marianne realized that she had not told anyone who was taking the exam with her. Lord Gremia smiled and noticed that Rennie had a list of participants. The girl wanted to ask where she got the list, but realized that she needed it to take bets. After that, she asked about the fact that no one knew anything about what happened during the exam. Her friends confirmed this. Burton asked if Treville's condition was so bad that the exam was cancelled. Marianne confirmed this and added that he must have passed out while bleeding. She added that the teachers couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, so they took him away immediately. Suddenly Zen asked again if Treville was bleeding from the mouth, and then he asked if the blood was black, and the girl answered yes. And then Zen, noticing the necklace that Rennie had given her, asked if she was still wearing it, and Marianne replied that her friend had asked her never to take it off. Taking the necklace in her hand, the girl suddenly noticed that it had turned black and broken. When she wanted to ask why this happened, Zen suddenly asked if she had felt any pain before, or perhaps something strange. Mariana replied that during the exam she felt a severe headache, just like before passing out. Burton asked Zen if he thought it was it, and Renee suddenly exclaimed that it was definitely it. Burton suddenly said thoughtfully that the world was a very strange place. If something like this happened even in the academy, Marianne, hearing this, asked what he meant. Zen, pointing to the necklace, explained that it contained sacred power. Moreover, the man added, he cast a protective spell on her, something that would strike back if someone harmed her. And the sacred power in the necklace prevails over the curse, and the necklace is activated. So while the girl was taking the exam, someone was cursed with something. The girl suddenly realized with horror that someone was trying to curse her, and it could be Trevor. She sat on the sofa and could not believe that the young man could do such a thing. Marianne didn't understand what the point was in attacking her specifically, to which Burton replied that apparently he needed something that only she had. And then he asked if Trevor had started communicating with her differently for no reason. At that moment, the girl remembered that they had one topic to study, the country of death. Zen suddenly said that he could ask directly and asked to look at the necklace, since the curse could be tracked. The girl, hearing this, asked what he would do when he found the one who did this. And then she added that he shouldn't dare do anything dangerous, to which the man said that he wouldn't leave any traces, and Renee added that she would cover for him, and even Burton added that he would help sort out the body. Hearing her friends, the girl sat in shock, not understanding what they were even talking about. Burton noted that they were joking to some extent, but Zen was right and it couldn't be left like that. He added that now she should go to the sanctuary, explain the situation, and undergo an examination. Marianne agreed with him. After that, the girls left the academy, and Rennie suggested that she go home and rest. But Marianne suddenly said that she had to go to the Duke's estate today. Rennie was surprised and asked why she was going there, to which the girl, embarrassed, replied that her mother was arriving today. Arriving at the estate and entering the dining room, the girl saw her mother, as well as the Duke and his son, who were sitting at the table. Madame Tatiana, Autumn was very happy to see her daughter. And then she asked why the girl looked so exhausted. Approaching Marianne and hugging her, the woman asked with concern if it was because of the exam that she had not slept all night again. While her mother stroked her cheek, the girl realized that this was the result of a curse, but decided to forget about it for a while. Madame Tatiana hugged her daughter again and said that she needed to eat well and rest. And then, leading the girl to the table, she invited Marianne to sit next to Orion. Although Marianne was not too happy with this proposal, she agreed with her mother. When the girl was deciding on the meat, Madame Tatiana asked if she and Orion had become friends, and the Duke added that his son is very reserved and it probably wasn't easy. Hearing from the man that he considers his son reserved, Mariana was very surprised. And then I realized that the Duke knew his son very poorly. The girl's mother admitted that the same thing happened to her daughter. Although she always says it directly if she doesn't like something, it's hard to accept and problematic, the woman added. The Duke smiled and remarked that one could get used to this and asked the girl what kind of dessert she liked. And then he ordered Irin to cook something, to which Marianne replied that she would eat anything, and the young Duke noticed that she liked orange juice. He then added that the girl drinks black tea for lunch and prefers salty desserts, which surprised her. He also said that Mariana often skips breakfast and eats light salads for lunch, but lately she has been eating little and needs to be taken care of. Looking at Marianne, he mentally asked her if he had found out perfectly what the girl loved. To this, she mentally replied that everything was correct except the orange juice, because she had ordered it for him. The Duke smiled and remarked that from what he could see, the two of them spent a lot of time together, which surprised them. Mariana decided to change the subject and asked how their trip went, since she heard that they went to the carnival. Madame Tatiana replied dreamily that they had no time for walks. They were completely busy enjoying their time at home. Orion and Marianne were very surprised to hear this, and the Duke remarked that such things should not be discussed in front of children. To this, the woman replied that he did not know how quickly children grew up in their time, and the girl at that moment thought that she knew that they spent time with the Duke, but her mother was talking about it openly for the first time. And then her gaze moved to the young Duke, and he sat there, embarrassed, with his eyes closed and silent. In the evening in the bedroom, the mother asked her daughter that if she had not asked her, she would not have come home. To this, the girl apologized and replied that she was still not used to being in the Duke's estate. Looking at her daughter, Madame Tatiana suddenly asked why she wasn't wearing a necklace. She added that she always wore the necklace that her friends gave her, and did she really lose it? To this, the girl replied that she had given it for repair. Her mother was very surprised that the necklace she wore every day needed repair. Hearing this, Mariana realized that her mother knew something about him and asked about it, to which the woman replied that the necklace held an unusual power. Mariana asked in surprise why she hadn't told her about it then, to which her mother replied that it was very expensive and, if she had known about it, her daughter would not have worn it. Madame Tatiana added that it was a gift given sincerely by her friends, and they care so much about Marianne that they even treat her mother sternly. After this, the woman asked what had happened to the necklace, to which the girl replied that she would only find out about it after the repairs. Madame Tatiana anxiously asked her daughter to promise that if something happened, she would make the best choice for herself. She added that Marianne didn't need to worry about her or anyone else. The woman patted her daughter on the shoulder and asked her to put herself first. When the girl promised this, Madame Tatiana asked her to contact her if there were any problems. And then she added that if not to her, then to Orion, since they seemed to get along and the young Duke would help her. Thinking that this was not the case, Marianne remembered the young man who always wanted to help her. And then she just sighed heavily without responding to her mother's words. Sometime later, Marianne confessed to her mother that she was constantly worried about something. The girl suddenly quietly said that when you treat someone sincerely, it is very easy to get stabbed in the back. And then she added that after this, a person becomes closed and feels empty inside. The mother asked her daughter if she was afraid of this, and when she answered no, she said that the emptiness could be filled with a new passion. Mariana noted that this was difficult for her because watching someone leave was very painful, and so people who try to get into her heart are like a heavy burden, to which the woman noted that you just need to talk to this person. And then Madame Tatiana suddenly asked if, after they had been kind to them, they would become strangers again if she and her husband separated. The girl looked at her mother in surprise, realizing that she was talking about Orion Miller, and Madame Tatiana, yawning widely, noticed that she was very tired and it was time to sleep. Saying that Marianne was probably tired too, she called her daughter to bed. Lying in bed, the girl wondered if she was afraid of breaking up with the young Duke and therefore did not want to establish a relationship with him. That night she realized why she had treated Orion the way she had, why she had been angry with herself, why she had been unable to respond to his sincerity, and why, despite her fatigue, she had not been able to sleep well. Mariana remembered herself as a little girl, and how one day her mother addressed her by name. A woman asked her daughter how she would feel if she disappeared one day. The girl remembered that she then screamed, asking where her mother was going and asking her not to leave. Then Madame Tatiana, saying that she was just joking, hugged her daughter. And then, saying that Mom would be late today, she asked her to play with the nanny. The little girl was very afraid that her mother would really disappear. She didn't understand how she would live if this happened, because it would be too terrible and sad. It was then that the little girl decided that if everyone was destined to leave sooner or later, then it would be better if it was her. Mariana, lying on the bed, suddenly opened her eyes, realizing that it was just a dream. Sitting up in bed, the girl wondered why she had dreamed this, and then decided that it didn't matter. Looking at the blue sky, the girl thought that the curse would leave consequences, but after a night's rest, she felt better. Perhaps it was thanks to Zena's protective magic that she walked down the corridor, and suddenly Marianne heard a strange sound. Looking out the window, the girl saw the young Duke, who was training early in the morning. Going out into the yard, Marianne decided that Orion now looked quite normal. But then the young man saw the girl, and smiling joyfully at her, he called her by name. Waving her hand at him, Marianne saw that he made a stupid grimace again. And the girl, because of yesterday's conversation with her mother, felt more constrained. After some time, Marianne met with her friend and Lord Gremia, who told her that rumors had spread throughout the academy that Treville had passed out during the exam. Because of this, the academy is on edge, and the Magic Tower and Sanctuary are already investigating this case. No one can understand what Treville felt under the influence of dark magic, and think that this could be the work of heretics. Burton added that he thought the academy would cancel classes, but no one knows how long the investigation will last. And also, Lord Gremia said that he had arrived, even Count Amber, which surprised the girl. And then she remembered that Treville had support from the Count, and Burton said that his trustee could not turn a blind eye to this, and the academy would not be able to hush up this matter. Marianne thought with concern that it was growing more and more, and hoped that she would not be drawn into this matter. The girl asked Burton how long they would have to wait for someone to confirm that Treville had attacked her. Embarrassed, the young man replied that the man was busy at the moment and could not give a clear answer. At that moment, Rennie said that he would then go and greet the bishop. Smiling, she added that as a representative of the Rouquet estate, she could not come to the shrine without showing her face. Looking at her friends talking, Marianne thought that Rennie was behaving like a true believer. At this point, Burton turned to the girl and asked her to wait while he escorted her friend and returned. Marianne waved to them and said that they could go and not worry. Left alone, the girl thought that she had come to the central temple again, and looking around, she realized that she would never get used to such luxury. Suddenly, the girl heard someone's footsteps and a voice that said that they really didn't understand that people were getting tired of listening to them endlessly. It was a woman priest who, noticing Marianne, looked at her thoughtfully. And then, saying that, judging by the girl's outfit, she was not of noble birth, she asked how she ended up there. After all, this is not a place that any family can get into, to which Marianne replied that perhaps she herself is from the nobility. The woman responded that a nobleman of such origin would not come here. The girl agreed with this and explained that she came here with a friend. The woman priest wondered for what purpose she had come here. And then I decided that it wasn't worth asking about such things, because many people who come here don't say why they really came. At this point, Marianne asked the priest if it was okay for her to just sit there. The woman humbly replied that there was no end in sight to those who came here to confess. Even if that was now the only thing she was entrusted with, there still had to be a balance. And then, winking at the girl, she asked if she agreed that everyone needs rest, and Mariana responded by suggesting that it was probably exhausting work. And when the priest said that it would be wonderful if someone offered her a helping hand, the girl asked in surprise if she was talking about her. Grabbing Marianne by the hand and dragging her along, the woman explained that she only needed to answer questions. And then, having seated her in the confessional, she added that in an hour or two she would replace her. Having closed the doors, the woman left, leaving the girl confused. Mariana really hoped that no one would come to confession in the next hour or two. She had never been in a confessional before, but looking around, she realized it was more comfortable than at home. The girl decided that this is precisely why people feel more comfortable here and can share secrets. Suddenly, Marianne realized that her hand had unconsciously reached to her neck to touch the necklace. And then she looked at her hand and saw on it the ring that Zen had given her. She didn't care what she thought about it, but she knew for sure that the man had put some other spell on the ring. Suddenly, someone entered the confessional, and Marianne heard a voice behind the partition. He asked the priest if he remembered what he had confessed earlier. At that moment, the girl realized that the one who had been here earlier had arrived, and she did not know what to do. And the male voice spoke of a gentleman who gives him too many assignments. Hearing this, Marianne thought that the man was a knight and was surprised that they had assignments. And the knight told about a lord who lived obsessed with a sword, acquired a younger sister, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Recently, he made training voluntary and it felt like freedom, but now he's locked himself in the library and the problems are starting to mount. Mariana, in her role as a priest, asked what kind of problems had arisen. To this, the man replied that the Lord began to read strange books and began to test something on them. After his friend's method of winning his sister over didn't work, he started reading novels that featured a younger sister. Covering his face with his hands, the knight explained that part of their authority was that the older brother behaved towards his little sister as in those novels. The man was in despair, because his lady began to look at him with contempt, and Marianne did not understand who was calling the Lord's sister that, and what these novels were about. And then the knight added that he would rather train all day instead. For the girl, this story sounded so familiar, and the man meanwhile said that the Lord understands that it doesn't work, but he just can't stop. Marianne asked if the problem was caused by the fact that their Lord and his sister did not communicate well, and suggested solving the problem at the root. The knight, hearing this, asked whether the priest meant that the cause needed to be eliminated. The girl confirmed this and added, to eliminate the part that was causing the problems. To this the knight said that it was impossible, and he could not get rid of his lord's little sister. The girl, hearing this, said that she meant that these two needed help to improve their relationship. When the knight replied that he would try his best, Marianne thought this was not a confessional, but a career counseling session. The bell rang, and the girl realized that the time for confession was over. The knight, having said goodbye, said that he would go, and Marianne decided that just listening had already exhausted her. Peering carefully out from behind the door, she decided that she had to get out of here before another one came. But then she noticed the uniform on the man leaving and realized that it was the uniform of the knights from the Miller estate. Remembering what the knight had confessed, Marianne could not believe that the eccentric lord turned out to be a young duke. And the girl also decided that when they returned, she would tell him not to read such strange novels. At this time, Burton saw her and asked with surprise if she had really been in the confessional all this time that he had been looking for her, to which the girl replied that she herself did not know how she got there. Lord Gremia at that moment asked her not to say that she was listening to the knight's confession, to which the girl embarrassedly replied that she had no choice. And then he suggested that they get back to business before she was caught, and they went to where the priest was talking. When Marianne saw him, she realized that this woman had put her in the confessional. After they met, she asked Burton not to say that this was the priest he was talking about. But Lord Gremia only smiled and said that it was from him that he asked for help, and the woman asked how everything went and whether it had helped her that she listened to the confession. The girl replied that she realized that nothing is done easily. Then, waving her hand, the woman said that she felt uneasy about fulfilling Burton's request, and so she decided to test it. Running her hand over the girl's face, she noticed that it was not surprising that sacred power oozed from an ordinary child, and asked if Marianne had drunk sacred water, which surprised her. Then the priest looked at Burton and said that she thought he was stealing holy water, to which the man replied that they sent him to annoying banquets. And then he added with a smile that he deserved at least a little bit, to which the woman remarked that she did not understand what others saw in him and adored him so much. Marianne remembered how he offered her some water to drink and realized that she was drinking sacred water. And Burton said that the water helped so that the curse no longer had any effects, and the girl decided that judging by his behavior, he was definitely Zen's friend. Rennie asked Marianne with concern how she was feeling, to which the priest replied that everything was fine for now. And then she added that the one who cast the curse suffered himself. The girl at that moment said that the guy lost a lot of blood. The priest replied that this was expected because the curse that was on her was called a puppet, something like brainwashing and hypnosis, thanks to which a person can be controlled, and it is rarely used. The priest was outraged that he used it to brainwash his friend. She added that if he used this power often, he should have quite a lot of flowers stored, and the energy of damage grows well if used on young men. At that moment, the girl remembered that Treville had an inordinate number of flowers growing, and wondered if they too were intended for the spell. That's all that was known for now. The rest would have to be asked of the sorcerer, but the academy was currently being closely watched, and it would be difficult to reach him. The priest asked them to try to bring him back alive, because that was the only way they could interrogate him. Marianne was shocked by all this talk and asked if he could back off. The girl explained that she and Treville had not communicated, and that she did not understand why he had cursed her. To this, the woman replied that it was possible, but hard to believe. She added that one should not think that someone who dabbles in spells would be so stupid. At that moment, Renee said Treville sat down next to her and assumed he wanted her exam paper. Marianne exclaimed. Did her friend really think that Beryl would risk a good grade when he already had a patron and was on the verge of being officially registered? When the girl added that this was nonsense, her friends asked in unison what he wanted then. And then Burton said that for now they are just waiting and watching, because they still don't know enough to do anything. The woman, folding her arms across her chest, said the priest's investigation would only lead to a formal procedure. Recalling the necklace, she added that some professors suspected a curse. And then, with a wink, she added that someone might express their dissatisfaction, and in that case, the investigation would grow in scale. They would have to call in high-ranking priests to organize a deep search for mana, like a curse, but then it would be obvious that the matter was not so insignificant. Burton asked if the academy would allow this, or if they would test every student. Marianne noted that this would be bad. And the woman said that then the smug nobles would start protesting because of this, and the academy would avoid it by any means necessary. Whether they drop the case or continue the investigation, both options will cause difficulties. Marianne hoped that it would not develop into anything serious, but Rennie exclaimed that it was she who was in mortal danger. The girl understood everything, but she really didn't want to worry her family. She didn't want anyone to know that a child from the Miller estate was studying at the academy, and she also imagined her mother and the Duke's reaction to all this. Having thanked the priest for all the information he had told them, the friends decided it was time for them to go. And Burton added that they would contact him again if they needed help, to which the woman remarked that he, a shameless child. Waving her hand at them, she wished them to go where they were going, and decided that she could rest some more. While Rennie and Burton discussed how the academy would react, Marianne wondered why Treville needed her. Remembering how he treated her, the girl was concerned that their projects coincided. She didn't understand what the problem was, if it wasn't about the grade. Then the girl remembered how they collided when she left the professor's office. At that moment, Treville helped her collect the sheets, and the girl suggested that maybe he needed the results of her project.